In a packed federal hearing that felt more like a battlefield, Jasmine Crockett confronted Elon Musk over $12.2 billion that mysteriously vanished. She exposed his AI empire as a carefully constructed illusion, built on fake code, AI-forged signatures, and lies masked as innovation. Under the heat of Capitol lights, Musk exploded in rage, slamming the table. But Crockett didn't flinch. Then she said one sentence, and the world watched Elon Musk fall silent. What did she say that brought America's most powerful man to his knees? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. 9 a.m. Room 214, Capitol Hill. The air inside the hearing chamber was thick with anticipation, camera shutters clicking like distant gunfire. Every seat was taken. Lining the walls were rows of journalists from the New York Times, BBC, Al Jazeera, and dozens of outlets streaming live to a nation desperate for answers. Outside, protesters held signs that read, "Where's the money?" and "Stop funding ghost tech." Inside, beneath the vaulted ceiling and beneath the blinding lights, the name Elon Musk hovered in every whisper and every gaze like a loaded weapon. The National Audit Office had just released a bombshell report. $12.2 billion in taxpayer funds allocated for technological modernization had vanished from federal ledgers without explanation. The name at the center of the financial black hole? Elon Musk. Through a tangled web of shell companies, venture proxies, and AI infrastructure licenses, his company Neurocore Capital had become the nexus of one of the largest financial disappearances in U.S. public funding history. But today was not just about finance. It was about accountability on national television. Enter Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, draped in navy blue, expression carved from stone. She didn't smile, didn't wave. She walked with the kind of silence that makes powerful men nervous. As chair of the House Subcommittee on Public Funds and Budget Integrity, Crockett wasn't just here to ask questions. She was here to draw blood, and the room knew it. Even the Republican members, who once dismissed her as too theatrical, now leaned forward, silent, because the math didn't lie. Billions were gone. Public schools had missed upgrades. Children in rural clinics lacked tablets and internet. And yet Musk's portfolio soared. The injustice wasn't abstract. It had faces, names, lost futures. This wasn't a hearing. This was the beginning of a reckoning, and Jasmine Crockett was holding the match. And then he entered, not as a man summoned by Congress, but as a figure who believed he still controlled the room. Elon Musk, the name that built rockets, ruled stock markets, and stirred both awe and fear in millions, walked through the tall double doors of room 214 like he was stepping onto a TED stage. The hush that fell over the room wasn't respect. It was tension. The kind that coils around your spine when power arrives in tailored arrogance. His charcoal gray suit, crisply pressed, shimmered faintly under the recessed lighting. The sunglasses stayed on longer than necessary, a barrier between him and the weight of scrutiny. When he finally took them off and placed them beside the mic, he revealed a gaze not flustered, not uncertain, but rehearsed, hard, unblinking, rehearsed. He sat, adjusted his cufflinks with the indifference of a man whose world had never truly been questioned. The chair creaked beneath him, but he didn't seem to notice. Then, without waiting for a formal cue, without acknowledging the gravity of the $12.2 billion disappearance at the center of the room, Musk leaned into the microphone with a practiced ease, eyes flicking toward the cameras like a performer finding his light. His voice, low, calm, almost smug, cut through the silence. "I didn't take the money, I turned it into solutions." The line echoed, calculated, curated for soundbite. And for a split second it worked. A few chuckles rippled through the back benches. Half-formed grins appeared on faces that didn't yet know where this was going. A Republican aide scribbled something approving, but across the aisle Jasmine Crockett didn't move. No blink, no reply, no reaction. Just a stillness that felt like a fuse had been lit under the table. With the precision of someone who had been waiting for this moment longer than the world had been watching, Crockett tapped her screen. Behind her, a massive LED panel lit up. No graphs, no charts, no legal jargon. Just 5 words centered in black serif type, cold and precise. Turned money into promises, then turned promises into smoke. There was no music, no drama in the delivery, just facts dressed in minimalist brutality. And yet it landed with the force of an indictment. The smirks disappeared. A producer in the press box audibly muttered, "Oh, damn." Even Musk's posture changed, just slightly. It was a moment measured in heartbeats and held breaths. Not because Crockett had shouted, not because she'd raised a single accusatory finger, but because she had done the one thing that technocrats and billionaires feared most. She'd stripped away the armor of complexity and spoken a language too simple to distort. There it was, not an accusation, a truth, boiled down to its cruelest, clearest form. Every camera lens now pointed to her. Every eye in the room left him. Elon Musk may have arrived to dominate the story, but Jasmine Crockett had just claimed the narrative. The silence from Jasmine's devastating slide still clung to the room like static when she finally leaned forward and spoke. It was her first line of the morning, and she delivered it not as a question, but as a blade sliding calmly across the surface of the hearing. Her tone was steady, almost quiet, but it rang out with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. There was no flourish in her voice, no dramatics, just the weight of someone who had spent nights buried in spreadsheets that didn't add up, in districts that didn't receive, in systems that failed real people. She adjusted the mic slightly, made brief eye contact with the chairman, then turned to Musk with eyes sharpened not by anger, but by resolve. "Let's begin with Alteryx Systems," she said, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She let the name linger, letting the unfamiliarity of it stir unease. The room held its breath. A company that, until 3 weeks ago, didn't exist in any federal vendor database. No payroll, no physical office, not even a working phone number. Now there was movement. Glances exchanged, pens lifted. A CNN producer sat up straighter. Jasmine clicked her remote. The screen behind her blinked to life again, showing a sterile transaction log, rows of numbers that looked cold, meaningless, until she added context. And yet, between March 3rd and March 24th, $2.7 billion was wired to Alteryx from the Digital Education Contingency Fund, a program intended to help underfunded school districts acquire basic technology. She didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. That's $2.7 billion gone, while students in Mississippi, West Virginia, and South Texas still share broken Chromebooks from 2015. The weight of that sentence didn't hang in the air. It dropped like concrete. You could feel it, like a fist closing around the room's collective breath. No one blinked. No one shifted. The intensity wasn't theatrical. It was clinical, forensic. She wasn't reciting numbers. She was describing a theft, a betrayal with receipts. Behind her, the screen changed again. Now a U.S. map marked with dots in red. Each dot represented a school district flagged by federal inspectors for delayed or incomplete technology upgrades. Red spread across the Deep South and the Rust Belt like infection points. Jasmine didn't gesture dramatically. She simply let the screen speak for itself. "We traced the transaction chain," she said. "Alteryx lists its headquarters as 4189 Banner Loop, Nevada. My staff sent a team there last week." She paused. "It's a shack, a literal tool shed. No people, no desks, no servers, just a locked door and an overgrown yard." There were gasps now, not loud, not exaggerated, just the kind that come when truth rips away the illusion of complexity. But the money went through, fast, faster than procurement protocols would ever allow without internal override. She leaned back slightly, locking eyes with Musk once more. And then the last line, low but unshakable, which means someone with authority wanted it that way. Her words didn't accuse. They convicted. The weight of Jasmine's revelation still hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The image of a billion-dollar transaction ending in a padlocked shed had shifted the mood from curiosity to quiet alarm. But Elon Musk, seasoned in controversy, fluent in deflection, leaned forward with the posture of a man who'd been here before. Not in this exact chair, not under oath, but in rooms where truth bent easily under influence and numbers could be buried under noise. His voice was steady, calculated, the cadence of someone attempting to reassert control. "That's a logistics hub," he said, brushing his fingers lightly across the table. Dismissive. Alteryx is a blockchain financial logistics unit. It handles decentralized disbursements to optimize state-level allocations. You're looking at innovation, not impropriety. The way he said it, like he was speaking to underachievers who just didn't get it, was as strategic as it was arrogant. A few heads in the back of the room nodded, not in agreement, but uncertainty. The kind of nods people give when they don't want to look uninformed on live television. But on the dais, there was no confusion. Jasmine Crockett hadn't moved an inch. Her shoulders were square, her notes untouched. And when she looked up again, her eyes were calm, but her expression carried a quiet finality, like the sound a gavel makes just before the sentence. She gave it a breath, one long, deliberate second, before speaking again. No edge in her tone, just a clarity that cut deeper than outrage ever could. "Then perhaps you can explain," she said, fixing her gaze directly on Musk, "why 87% of the invoices issued by Alteryx systems were transmitted from the same IP address, registered not to a data center, not to a field terminal, but to a private residence in Austin, Texas." This time the gasp wasn't whispered. It was audible. A sharp intake of breath swept the room like a gust before a storm. One of the Senate staffers dropped a pen. Even the chairman, who had remained neutral until now, shifted forward in his chair. Behind Jasmine, a new image appeared on the screen. A sleek, minimalist map with a single red beacon blinking steadily over a residential neighborhood. There was no dramatic music. It didn't need it. The image was more damning than any soundbite. Jasmine kept going, her voice still composed, but her words sharpening with every syllable. "That address," she continued, "is your personal residence. Same router, same static IP, used to generate, timestamp, and send billing requests totaling more than $2 billion. So tell me again, Mr. Musk, how this was a decentralized system?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look around for validation. She didn't need to. The question hung in the room like a verdict already decided. What she laid bare wasn't just a contradiction. It was a fracture in Musk's entire defense. The very idea of decentralization, the core principle that he had wielded like a shield, had just been exposed as a facade, thin, traceable, and built from his own home. And in that moment, for the first time since he'd stepped into room 214, Elon Musk said nothing. The moment Jasmine finished her line about the Austin IP address, the air in the hearing room didn't settle. It tightened, like everyone present had just realized the oxygen was being rationed. And before anyone could react, before the cameras could even reset focus, Jasmine advanced again. The pace wasn't rushed, but deliberate, like a surgeon who knew exactly where to cut next. She clicked her remote. The massive screen behind her changed with a soft flicker, displaying something that looked, at first glance, unremarkable. A plain white document, a single-page invoice, no graphics, no branding, just simple black text on digital paper. It was the kind of file federal systems process by the thousands. But this one was different. "This invoice," Jasmine began, her tone steady and unshaken, "was paid in full 4 months ago." Her voice carried clearly across the hall. No need to raise it. The room was already hanging on every syllable. $92 million, she repeated, for a financial architecture model that, according to this document, was delivered in encrypted form to federal servers. The words themselves were cold, sterile, but Jasmine didn't rely on emotion to make her case. She relied on proof. She walked slowly toward the screen, not for drama, but for clarity, and tapped the document's title line with her index finger. "The vendor that issued this invoice," she continued, "is a company called Quanta Core Dynamics. Sounds impressive, right? Supposedly a leader in quantum financial design. Futuristic, scientific, untouchable." Then she turned slightly, clicked again, and the screen split in half. The left side still showed the invoice, but the right side, that drew a visible reaction. It was a screenshot from Google Maps, a street view image of a tired old building in Dayton, Ohio. The place looked forgotten by time. The paint on the bricks had chipped down to the concrete. The lot was cracked, the grass overgrown, and mounted above the rusted front door, a faded wooden sign still read, Tony's Smokehouse BBQ. A murmur rippled through the gallery. This, Jasmine said, never raising her voice, is the registered address of Quanta Core Dynamics. She let the absurdity speak for itself. No staff, no computers, no servers, no license to operate in finance. In fact, the only license this location has held in the last decade is for food service. Her tone turned even flatter, deliberate and deadly. And yet this is where $92 million in taxpayer funds was sent for a financial model that no one at Treasury has ever seen. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged. No one dared look away. No one checked their phone. Even the camera crews in the back stood frozen, lenses locked in place. Jasmine stepped away from the screen now and returned to her seat. Her next words came not with fire, but with finality. But someone used this shell to request $92 million. And the metadata from the invoice file? She paused. It lists the document's author as a Musk. There it was. Not an accusation, a connection. Cold, digital, unmistakable. A hush fell over the room like a heavy curtain. The name, Musk, wasn't just a username. In that moment, it became evidence. Evidence that the country's richest man had his fingerprint on a payment trail leading to an empty barbecue joint in Ohio. Then, as if history itself had been waiting for someone to say it out loud, a voice from the right side of the dais, a congressman from Utah, conservative and previously silent, muttered into the silence, "We're talking about national-level fraud." He didn't shout. He didn't look at anyone. But the words hit like a gavel, because now this wasn't just a hearing. It wasn't even about Musk anymore. It was about whether anyone, anywhere, was still bigger than the truth. The words national-level fraud had barely finished echoing through the chamber when Elon Musk acted. Not with panic, not with denial, but with the cold, deliberate calm of a man used to turning pressure into power. He reached into a thick binder beside him, pulled out a single sheet of paper protected in a clear plastic sleeve, and held it up, like a shield against what was coming. He spoke with confidence, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "This," he said clearly, "is a memorandum of understanding, signed by the Department of Energy, permitting the development and deployment of autonomous financial intelligence systems." He didn't wait for questions. He placed the document on the table and slid it forward, directly into the hands of the committee. Every movement he made seemed to say, "See, this was allowed." Then came the next line, measured, powerful. Self-directed AI funding, approved by the government itself. You call it theft, I call it policy. As he finished speaking, the main screen behind him lit up, now showing the full document. It looked official. The formatting, the headers, the legal tone, everything felt real. And then, at the bottom of the page, in bold ink, was a signature. L. M. Dillard, Secretary of Energy. The room paused. For the first time that morning, doubt briefly crossed a few faces. Some lawmakers leaned closer. Aides exchanged quick glances. From a distance, this wasn't a defense. It was a counterstrike. A document with a cabinet-level signature? If it held up, it could change everything. Journalists in the gallery scrambled to zoom in on the signature. One camera operator whispered, "Is this real?" under his breath. On social media, the live stream chat exploded. Musk's supporters were already posting hashtags like #MOU proof and #government greenlight. And for a few seconds, it worked. Elon Musk looked composed, in control, maybe even victorious. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Not 1 inch. She stared at the screen, not confused, not rattled, but calm. Because she already knew what the others didn't. This wasn't a document that proved innocence. It was a trap he had just walked into himself. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't glance at her team. She didn't look at the reporters. She didn't even look at Elon Musk. Because she didn't need to. The moment he slid that printed memorandum across the table like it was his legal armor, Jasmine already knew what it was, and more importantly, what it wasn't. While the room held its breath, She simply tapped her tablet, cool and quiet, as if turning a page in a story she'd already read to the end. And that was when the screen behind her changed. Again. Gone was the version Elon had presented, full of bloated language and sweeping powers. Now a second version came into view, stark and clean. It carried the same title, the same official seal of the Department of Energy, even the same date, January 12th, 2024. The font matched. The formatting was nearly identical. But something was very different. Something subtle, yet seismic. Side by side, both documents were projected for the nation to see. The left side, Elon Musk's version, planted, prepared, and dramatic. The right side, the version filed on record, verifiable, quiet, and devastating. Jasmine rose slightly, her hands never shaking, her voice never raised. What Mr. Musk has presented, she said with the precision of a closing argument, is not the full document. She gestured toward the right-hand projection. Her tone was sharper now, like steel being drawn from a sheath. This, she continued, motioning clearly for all to see, is the original, unedited version, filed directly with the Department of Energy on January 12th, 2024. She didn't have to say the rest yet. The committee members were already leaning closer, scanning the words with their own eyes. Paragraph by paragraph, the differences emerged like invisible ink under heat. At first it was subtle, a few phrases missing, a header repositioned, but then on page 4 the gap widened, and what was absent became impossible to ignore. The room began to still, not from surprise but from recognition. There was no clause authorizing AI systems to control federal funds. There were no lines approving autonomous financial intelligence engines. The sweeping authority Musk had claimed just minutes earlier was nowhere to be found. Not blacked out, not redacted, just absent entirely. The truth wasn't hiding. It had never been there to begin with. Jasmine took a breath, her voice unwavering. "There is no provision," she said slowly, clearly, and with the weight of accountability, "for the unilateral use of public funds by private AI systems. None. The clause Mr. Musk refers to does not appear in the original memorandum because it was never approved." And with that, the illusion shattered. A dozen reactions rippled through the room like a slow-building earthquake. One senator jerked upright in his chair, whispering something urgent to a staffer. Another pinched the bridge of his nose as if trying to will away what he'd just seen. Even a few Republican members, who had up to that point kept their arms crossed and eyes skeptical, were now openly exchanging side glances, brows furrowed in disbelief. For the first time all morning, Musk was no longer holding the floor. His fingers, once laced confidently on the table, now twitched slightly. His eyes flicked toward the screen, then to the printed document in front of him, still protected in its clear plastic sleeve, as though the illusion of formality could still carry weight. The silence was loud, louder than shouting, louder than protest. It was the kind of silence that meant something had just turned. The momentum had shifted, not subtly but completely, and everyone in the room knew it. From the press gallery above, one journalist muttered under her breath, "That's game." Another whispered, "He forged it." On the live stream, chat feeds exploded. The hashtags flipped instantly. Original memo fiction by Musk Crockett uncovers truth in Jasmine. She didn't celebrate. She didn't break eye contact with the committee, because she wasn't here for a moment. She was here for accountability, for the people whose laptops never arrived, for the schools whose funding disappeared, for the taxpayers who had no idea their money was being funneled through empty promises and pixelated paper trails. The illusion of legitimacy had just been stripped away, and what remained was fraud dressed in federal letterhead. The weight of the forged memorandum still sat heavy in the room when Jasmine Crockett leaned slightly toward her microphone. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply spoke 5 words with quiet authority. "I'd like to bring in a witness." Immediately, the lights dimmed slightly, and the hearing room's main screen faded to black. The anticipation returned like a tightening thread. Everyone could feel something coming, something different. You could almost hear the cameras locking focus, the sharp breath of an aide holding a notepad too tightly. This wasn't just about documents anymore. Jasmine was about to put a voice to the deception. Then the screen flickered. A live stream feed appeared. The frame was grainy, the lighting deliberately dark. The man's face was completely obscured by a deep hood, his features hidden in shadow. His voice, distorted by a modulator, was deep and mechanical, but beneath the artificial filter, it was clearly human. A single label appeared below him. Former Senior Engineer, Neurocore AI Division. He didn't pause, he didn't hesitate, and what he said next changed the air in the room. What we sold, the voice began, calm but saturated with something deeper, remorse perhaps, or fatigue, was a single prototype, an unfinished AI budgeting tool with no real backend, just interface graphics, and we cloned it. The words landed without drama, but the silence that followed was deafening. People didn't shift in their chairs, they froze in them. Committee members turned their heads slowly, almost in disbelief. Staffers began whispering frantically behind their hands. Every person watching the live stream, in that moment, knew they were no longer listening to allegations. They were hearing a confession. Mr. Musk approved repackaging the exact same software, under different brand names, for separate state contracts, the voice continued, unshaken. The code didn't change, only the name on the invoice. What had once been a slow-burning scandal had just exploded into a full-scale expose. And still the whistleblower spoke, not bitterly, not emotionally, but with the kind of cold clarity that comes only when the truth can no longer stay buried. Each version looked new on the surface, he said, but underneath, it did nothing. It was a shell, just a PowerPoint on top of a non-functional algorithm. Gasps now, audible, involuntary. But it was the next sentence that cracked the room open completely. We once printed a demo screen, just a screenshot, and walked away with $600 million in signed contracts. In the seconds that followed, no one spoke. Not the chairman, not the aides, not even Elon Musk. His usual defiance had hardened into something quieter now. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. The smirk was gone. His eyes, once darting toward cameras and lawmakers with confidence, now stared down at the surface of the desk in front of him. Because this wasn't an opinion. This wasn't a theory or a rival politician's attack line. This was inside knowledge, and it was live. Jasmine Crockett remained still. She didn't need to add commentary. The facts were louder than anything she could say, because in that moment, every person in the room understood what they were hearing. This wasn't just corruption. This was a scam on a national scale. Taxpayer money traded for fake code and PowerPoint slides. Promises sold by a billionaire, backed by nothing, and cashed in for millions. This wasn't a software flaw. It was a moral failure. The weight of the whistleblower's testimony still hung in the air like a black veil. The room hadn't moved. It hadn't exhaled. It was as if every breath had been suspended between disbelief and outrage. The words, "We printed a demo screen and walked away with $600 million weren't just shocking. They were radioactive. You could feel them pulsing in the walls, traveling through every microphone, reverberating through every live stream. And for a long, brutal moment, Elon Musk said nothing. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw locked, hands clenched on the table like he was bracing for impact. But then, something cracked. With a sudden sharp sound, his palm slammed against the hardwood table. It wasn't a casual gesture. It wasn't frustration. It was fury, raw, unfiltered, and loud. Several members of the chamber flinched. Aides jumped. The courtroom-style stillness shattered. "I'm not a thief," Musk shouted, his voice rising for the first time since the hearing began. The volume surged, bouncing off the chamber's high walls. "I'm not a thief. I'm building the future. I'm solving the problems no one else dares to touch. You think it's easy? You think these systems create themselves?" His hands were out now, sweeping across the table, his face flushed red. "I'm the only one moving this country forward while you sit here throwing stones. I don't apologize for vision." It was more than a defense. It was a breakdown disguised as a manifesto. His voice cracked slightly at the end, not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding together a narrative that had begun to crumble before a global audience. He wasn't arguing policy anymore. He was fighting for survival, clinging to the one identity that had protected him for decades. The visionary, the builder, the man ahead of his time. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She didn't even look surprised. She sat still for one long beat, letting the rage burn itself out like a fire that had run out of oxygen. Then she leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and looked Musk directly in the eye. Her voice, when it came, was barely louder than a whisper, but it cut through the chamber like a scalpel. Each word slow, deliberate, cold with truth. "The problem," she said, "is that you built it with money taken from the poor, then slapped the word vision on top of it like that made it holy." The chamber froze. For a full 2 seconds, no one spoke. No one moved. The line dropped like a lead weight, through every floor, every camera, every screen. And then suddenly the silence cracked wide open. From the far right of the panel, a voice rose, not in protest, but in applause. A single opposition lawmaker, who had sat arms crossed for the entire hearing, leaned back in his seat and clapped. Once, twice, then 3 times. It echoed sharply through the marble-lined walls. Then another joined him, and another. The public gallery, where families of underfunded schools had been watching quietly all morning, erupted into a soft, steady wave of applause. Not loud or chaotic, but resolute. Musk's head dipped slightly. His jaw was still set, but the fire in his eyes had dulled. The narrative had turned, not because someone shouted louder, but because someone had spoken the truth plainly. Outside the chamber, social media erupted. The moment was clipped and posted in seconds. The caption under every repost read the same line. "You built it with money taken from the poor, then called it vision." And across the country, from forgotten classrooms to under-equipped hospitals, people were listening. Because for once, someone had said what they had all felt for years. And the room once ruled by silence and power now belonged to the truth. The room was still trembling from the aftershock of Jasmine's last words. "You built it with money taken from the poor," when she turned back to the table in front of her and picked up one final folder. Her movements were calm, deliberate, and almost too quiet for what was coming next. But anyone who had been watching her this entire hearing knew, when Jasmine Crockett went silent, the truth was about to roar. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't stand. She didn't need to. She simply slid the last document across the polished wood toward the chairman and said, "One more file, Mr. Chairman. This one involves the pandemic relief funds." A murmur swept through the room. The phrase pandemic relief carried a different weight. It wasn't just about budgets and grants anymore. It was about desperation, loss, and the billions allocated during America's most vulnerable moment. This wasn't just fraud. This was betrayal in the middle of national crisis. The screen behind Jasmine came to life again, this time displaying a scanned PDF titled Emergency Disbursement Agreement, COVID Fiscal Recovery Act. Beneath the title was a familiar name. The agency's signature line had been filled, signed, and stamped. Marshall J. Graves, Director of Disbursements, Federal Recovery Office. The signature was clean. The digital timestamp matched the week the disbursement was approved. Everything looked perfect, but as Jasmine tapped her tablet once more, 2 additional screens appeared on either side of the main projection. Side by side, forensic software in real time. And then she said it. "This signature," Jasmine said slowly, letting each word hit the room like a gavel, "is not real. It was generated using deepfake AI, an artificial replication of an actual public servant's writing style. Not just forged, but manufactured." The chamber exploded, not in volume, but in tension. Eyes widened, mouths opened. It was as if the very air had thickened. Behind her, the forensic expert sitting quietly on the second row of the witness gallery stood, holding a tablet in both hands. The chairman nodded to him wordlessly. The expert stepped forward, voice firm and precise. "Our analysis, conducted using layered signature authentication tools, confirms that this signature does not match any known signature in the Federal Employment Archive. The stroke pattern, the pressure points, and the vector path suggests algorithmic modeling, not human execution. He held up the screen. It showed a 3D breakdown of the signature line. One layer peeled back, then another. With each removal, it became more obvious. There was no hand behind this ink, just math, just mimicry. In short, the expert said with finality, this signature does not exist in any government records. It was never written. It was never witnessed. It is digitally generated. Gasps. Audible. One senator nearly dropped his pen. Another leaned back in his chair as if trying to physically distance himself from the horror of what was unfolding. Jasmine said nothing. She didn't need to. She stood completely still, letting the gravity of the revelation crush the last defenses still standing around Musk. The chairman adjusted his microphone. His hands were trembling now, not from nerves but from fury. He turned slightly to face the sergeant-at-arms stationed near the hearing room side entrance. Begin formal request for criminal investigation. Immediate referral to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This hearing has crossed into federal fraud jurisdiction. And then the final image, Elon Musk. No outburst this time, no smirk, no speech, no attempt to interrupt. He didn't lift his head. He didn't make eye contact. He simply stared downward at the fake signature projected in front of him. His empire's last defense, now burning under forensic light. His hands, once so expressive, now lay still against the table. He did not protest. He did not deny. He just lowered his head. And in that gesture, quiet, small, and irreversible, every person in the room understood that the story was over. Not the fight, not the fallout, but the illusion. It was gone. Finally, irrevocably. And for the first time in that chamber, truth stood without being challenged. The moment Elon Musk lowered his head, silently surrendering to the weight of evidence, the echo of that image left the chamber and detonated across the world. There was no need for a verdict. The public had already seen the receipts, heard the voice, and watched the empire crack under its own artificial signature. And just like that, the walls of Capitol Hill gave way to something even louder. The global roar of media, headlines, and digital outrage. The first wave hit within minutes. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox all broke programming simultaneously to flash red banners across the bottom of their screens. Breaking, Musk accused of deepfake signature in $600 million fraud case. Live, Jasmine Crockett shatters AI defense. FBI launches criminal probe into SpaceX-affiliated pandemic funds. On every major news channel, anchors spoke in hushed tones, struggling to keep up with the story unfolding in real time. The headlines came fast, stacking on top of one another like aftershocks. Elon Musk, visionary or financial predator? Jasmine Crockett, the woman who dared to cross the line and made it move. $12.2 billion missing. One voice refused to look away. And while the networks scrambled to fact-check and frame their angles, the internet had no such patience. The viral storm exploded like dry tinder under a magnifying glass. On Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit, millions tuned in to rewatch the exact moment the livestream witness said, "We walked away with $600 million in signed contracts." Within 10 minutes, it had been clipped, subtitled, reposted in 7 languages. And then came the hashtags, waves of them, crashing over every trending topic. 12 billion trail, tracking the money that vanished into fake shell companies. Jasmine unmasked Elon, celebrating the moment Congresswoman Crockett exposed the forgery. Fraud over future, a brutal twist on Musk's brand of techno-utopianism. Even more hashtags followed in rapid succession. Vision or theft Crockett. 2026 fake signatures, real crimes PowerPoint gate. On Instagram, artists sketched political cartoons within hours. One viral post showed Musk holding a blueprint titled The Future, with billions of tax dollars falling from the bottom as Jasmine stood beneath him, holding a single burning document. The caption read, "She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She just opened the file." On YouTube, live stream commentary channels ran replays with frame-by-frame analysis, pointing to the exact millisecond Musk's hand clenched, the shift in his breathing, the subtle collapse of posture when the AI forged signature was exposed. Legal experts weighed in. Former prosecutors began using words like wire fraud, racketeering, and federal indictment timeline. But while the headlines screamed, Jasmine Crockett remained silent. No press conference, no victory lap, no choreographed celebration. She left the hearing the same way she entered it, focused, measured, and mission-driven. Cameras followed her as she exited through the side of the building, escorted only by a single staffer and a handful of Capitol Police. Yet the country couldn't stop talking. Cable debates ignited, now not just about Elon Musk, but about what we call genius and what we excuse in its name. One panel on PBS asked, "Are we too quick to forgive innovation when it steals from the vulnerable?" A segment on BBC World posed the question, can AI ambition ever justify human exploitation? And across living rooms, classrooms, and courtroom corridors, people began to replay not just Jasmine's facts, but her tone. She hadn't come into that room to perform. She came to hold a mirror up to power and refused to look away when the reflection turned ugly. But not everyone was celebrating. In tech investor circles, panic began to spread. Emails leaked showing venture capital firms quietly reevaluating their portfolios with Musk-affiliated ventures. Tesla stock dipped 8% in the final hour of trading. Neuralink froze hiring. And for the first time in over a decade, SpaceX issued a press blackout. Even Washington's power brokers felt the shift. Behind closed doors, lawmakers were reportedly divided. Some whispered about Crockett overstepping. Others, though, saw a new kind of political currency in what she'd done. One senator, off camera but caught on a hot mic, muttered, "She didn't just bring down Musk, she reminded this country what accountability looks like." And as the sun set over Washington that night, the photos flooded every major front page. Not of Musk, not of the committee, but of Jasmine. Standing alone on the Capitol steps, no podium, no teleprompter, just her, still in the same navy blazer, still holding the same tablet that changed everything. The expression on her face wasn't one of triumph. It was heavier than that. Like she knew the real cost of truth wasn't in the delivering, but in what came after. Because while Elon Musk had built empires on rockets, code, and power plays, Jasmine Crockett had done something rarer. She had walked into the heart of wealth, silence, and institutional complicity, and refused to speak gently to it. She hadn't chased headlines. They had chased her, because no one could deny it anymore. Elon Musk may have shaped a generation of technology, but Jasmine Crockett had just reshaped its accountability. And that, more than any launch or innovation, was the moment that would be remembered. The firestorm outside the Capitol hadn't faded when Jasmine Crockett emerged from the building's east steps. Flashbulbs erupted before her first shoe met the stone. Reporters surged forward, microphones extended like spears, voices layered in chaos, each one trying to make their headline the next viral quote. Behind her, the rotunda still buzzed with disbelief, but Jasmine didn't look back. Her shoulders were squared, her stride even. She wasn't walking away from a victory. She was walking straight through the center of something broken. A sea of cameras parted slightly as one voice rose above the rest. It wasn't shouted, but asked with the quiet hope of a nation watching from behind glass screens. "Do you think you've won, Congresswoman?" The reporter didn't name Musk. He didn't need to. The question hovered there, thick with implications. About power, about truth, about the meaning of justice when wealth has long stood in its place. Jasmine stopped, slowly, fully. And in that instant, the crowd did too. The hum of noise around her stilled, like the atmosphere itself leaned in to hear what would follow. She turned her head, eyes steady, and met the reporter's gaze without hesitation. Her voice didn't need amplification. She didn't lift a mic. She didn't ask for silence. She didn't whisper. But the world heard every word. "The real win," she said, "doesn't happen when he lowers his head. The real win is when the people finally know where their tax dollars went." She held there, no smile, no triumphant pose. Just clarity, sharp as steel. The kind of clarity that doesn't beg for applause because it already knows the weight of what it carries. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The microphones lowered. The cameras stayed fixed but still. It was as if everyone knew. This wasn't just the end of a hearing. It was the beginning of something harder, deeper, more uncomfortable. The moment didn't feel like victory. It felt like reckoning, and Jasmine didn't flinch under it. She turned, descended the final 3 steps, and disappeared into a black SUV, waiting quietly at the curb. There were no sirens, no escorts, just a quiet door shut behind her. And then the rush returned. Reporters calling out, cameramen scrambling for angles. But the quote had already been captured, and the silence that followed it said more than any broadcast could. That night, every major outlet ran the clip, looped on television, stitched into reels, dissected by analysts. But none of them had to dress it up. Jasmine's line stood on its own. The real win is when the people finally know where their tax dollars went. On Twitter, the phrase became its own headline. On TikTok, teenagers turned it into voiceovers layered with footage of overcrowded classrooms and closed rural hospitals. In barbershops, boardrooms, and bus stops, people repeated it, not like a soundbite, but like a measuring stick. Where did it go? Where was it supposed to go? Who kept it from getting there? By morning, the world had caught up. The New York Times ran its Sunday edition with a front-page headline in bold serif, black ink across clean white. The day tech was held accountable. Underneath it, a single image. Jasmine Crockett, standing alone beneath the Capitol's columns, eyes level with the lens. The blue sky cloudless behind her. No drama, no chaos, just conviction. The editorial that followed read more like a confession than a commentary. It spoke of years spent glorifying innovation while ignoring the damage left in its shadow. It named the ways oversight had failed, not just politically, but morally. And it ended not by praising Crockett, but by warning the nation. Accountability must never wait until the money's gone. Other headlines followed suit. The Guardian called her the quiet flame. The Washington Post labeled the hearing Silicon Valley's Watergate. Time magazine, preparing its next issue, fast-tracked a cover with Jasmine's photo and one question etched across it in bold red. Who guards the future? The stock market, still reeling, saw tech futures dip sharply. Congressional offices reported hundreds of thousands of emails demanding new legislation to prevent another misuse of federal funds. 2 governors announced internal audits of their AI grant programs, and the FBI confirmed that the criminal investigation into Musk's companies had officially begun. But amidst the whirlwind, Jasmine remained where she always had, out of the spotlight, inside her district office, reviewing new legislation designed to put federal contract databases into public view. Because while the world had declared her a hero, she didn't see it that way. She wasn't here to be remembered. She was here to make sure the next time someone asked, "Where did our money go?" they didn't have to wait 5 years for an answer. She had already said it on the steps, but now the country was starting to understand what she meant. It wasn't about a man bowing his head. It was about lifting everyone else's. And that, no matter how much noise followed, was the only victory that mattered. The country was still reeling. Investigations were underway. Media outlets were in full post-mortem mode. And the public, angry, awake, and relentless, wasn't letting go. Jasmine Crockett's words were still echoing in households and hearing rooms alike. The real win is when the people finally know where their tax dollars went. But while the headlines roared and social media crowned her a truth teller, Jasmine had already moved to the next battlefield, the one that rarely made viral clips, but determined everything: legislation. It began quietly, without press conferences or viral sound bites. Just a plain white folder carried under her arm, marked only by a black Sharpie. Transparency Act Draft, JC. Inside were 47 pages of policy, oversight reform, and digital accountability infrastructure. A blueprint to make sure what happened in that hearing would never happen again. No more shell companies disguised in acronyms. No more AI-generated signatures sliding past procurement offices. No more silence. No more hiding. And so, just 4 days after the explosive hearing, Jasmine Crockett stood before the House Appropriations Committee and submitted a bill that would change the way federal money moved through the American system. The chamber was packed, not just with lawmakers, but with activists, journalists, and victims of past bureaucratic failure. Everyone wanted to see what she would do next. And Jasmine? She didn't come with fire this time. She came with law. The bill was called the Crockett Fiscal Transparency Act of 2025. Its language was simple, but every line was sharp enough to draw blood. It demanded that every federal contract over $10 million include a publicly accessible digital trail, from the first draft of the proposal to the last invoice paid. It called for mandatory real-time disclosures of vendor ownership, AI integration reports, and third-party verification of all signatures on any federal disbursement. But the heart of it, the clause that made committee members squirm in their chairs, was Section 4, Citizen Audit Rights. Under that clause, every American taxpayer would be able to log into a secure portal, enter their zip code, and see exactly where every federal dollar touching their district was going. Not through summaries, not through redacted memos, through actual time-stamped line items. If a laptop grant was delayed, the portal would show why. If a software contract changed names midstream, the public would see who signed off. No intermediaries, no explanations. Just truth. The chamber grew tense as she read that clause aloud, not because it was radical, but because it was unavoidable. For decades, politicians had promised transparency. Jasmine had written it into code. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply looked at the room and said, "If we don't let the public follow the money, we're not running a democracy. We're running a casino." That line made it into every news broadcast that night. But behind the scenes, resistance was swift. Lobbyists flooded committee offices within hours, calling the bill too aggressive, technologically burdensome, and a threat to proprietary systems. Several tech firms quietly assembled a coalition to review and offer revisions. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She took the meetings. She listened. Then she walked out and refused to strip a single provision. Because she knew what they were really afraid of wasn't exposure, it was memory. For the first time, the American public had watched fraud unfold in real time, and they hadn't looked away. Jasmine wasn't riding momentum. She was harnessing it into statute. And when the bill hit the floor for debate, the pressure reached a boiling point. Lawmakers who'd once dismissed her as performative now found themselves quoting her. One moderate from Pennsylvania called the bill our best shot at restoring public trust. A progressive from Illinois called it reparations for decades of institutional gaslighting. Even a conservative from Utah, after days of silence, stood and said, "You may not agree with how she delivered the truth, but you cannot deny that it was the truth." As the vote loomed, no one could predict the outcome. The halls of Congress were filled with the kind of anxiety usually reserved for wartime resolutions. Reporters camped outside. Advocacy groups launched call-in campaigns. Hundreds of thousands of emails flooded congressional inboxes, all echoing the same phrase, "Pass the Crockett Act." And Jasmine? She didn't watch the coverage. She didn't tweet. She spent the night before the vote alone in her office, revisiting every line of the bill, marking places where future amendments might strengthen it even more. She didn't want a headline. She wanted permanence. Because this wasn't about Elon Musk anymore. It was about the next billion-dollar lie and how to stop it before it started. The following morning, at precisely 10:02 a.m., the vote began. One by one, the green lights lit up, then red, then green again. Onlookers held their breath. Staffers watched with fingers crossed. And when the final tally appeared, 268 in favor, 161 against, the chamber erupted. Not with celebration, but with something heavier, relief. Relief that finally the truth had a structure to stand on. And as the final gavel dropped, Jasmine Crockett didn't cheer. She simply closed her folder, stood up, and walked out of the chamber the same way she had entered it months ago, quietly, confidently, and without a single doubt about why she was there. Because this wasn't a legacy. It was a warning to every shadow still hiding behind a screen. The vote was over. The cameras had gone dark. The headlines were already echoing through every corridor of the internet. But long after the final gavel fell and the press vans pulled away from the Capitol, something deeper remained, an invisible current running beneath the surface of the nation. It wasn't about Elon Musk anymore. It wasn't even about the $12 billion. It was about what this fight exposed, a truth America had long whispered, but rarely dared to face head-on. And in that truth lived a human lesson far larger than any courtroom verdict. At the center of it all stood Jasmine Crockett, not just as a congresswoman, not even as a symbol, but as a reminder of what it costs to challenge power that has never been questioned before. The injustice she faced wasn't just systemic, it was personal. From the moment she opened her file to the instant she walked out of that chamber, she stood alone against a machine built to silence, confuse, and delay. But what she proved, without theatrics, without revenge, was that integrity does not need permission to exist. It simply needs someone willing to bear the weight of standing still while the rest of the world tries to spin. And that weight, that resistance, that's where the lesson begins. Because this was never just about signatures and missing money. It was about the quiet assumption that no one would look too closely, that a name like Musk could shield corruption with charisma, that innovation could excuse theft, that complexity could hide intent. The real battle wasn't over AI systems or forged contracts. It was over something far older and more dangerous. The idea that those with vision are entitled to skip the rules written for everyone else. That belief unchecked becomes poison. Jasmine Crockett faced that poison, drank it publicly, and still walked out upright. And in doing so, she didn't just challenge a billionaire. She challenged a belief that had made injustice feel inevitable. There's something chilling about how easy it was for all of it to happen. A fake company in an Ohio barbecue shack, an AI-generated signature undetectable without expert tools, a billion-dollar invoice approved by a digital sleight of hand. None of it looked like a crime until someone had the courage to say, wait, that doesn't make sense. Jasmine said it. She said it not with screaming or spectacle, but with patience and precision. And that patience revealed another lesson. That courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a woman alone in her office at 2 a.m., reading a memo for the 6th time because something still doesn't sit right. And that's where the real fight begins. Not in the hearing room, but in the long hours before anyone's watching. We live in a time where attention is currency, where outrage is rewarded more than truth. But Jasmine's path defied that. She didn't go viral for yelling. She went viral for exposing, for asking the questions no one else dared to ask, and for listening when others were too busy performing. She didn't just hold Elon Musk accountable. She held herself accountable first, to the people she represented, to the teachers who never got their classroom grants, to the nurses using broken tablets in rural clinics, to every taxpayer who has been told year after year, we can't fund that right now, while somewhere else a billionaire printed PowerPoints and walked off with millions. And then there's the whistleblower. We'll never know his name. His voice was altered. His face was hidden. But his choice, to step forward into the storm, knowing full well what might happen next, was a lesson in moral clarity. Not all heroes are born from conflict. Some are created by conscience. He reminded us that sometimes the most radical act in a corrupt world is simply telling the truth. That courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it stutters. But still, it speaks. And when it does, the system has no choice but to listen. There was also a lesson for those who didn't speak, for the advisors who looked the other way, for the agencies that signed the checks without reading the fine print, for the journalists who only started digging after the scandal broke. Their silence wasn't just complicity, it was evidence. Evidence that systems don't break in one dramatic moment. They erode slowly, quietly under the weight of people who don't ask questions because the answers might cost too much. And yet, the biggest lesson may be the simplest. That power, when left unchallenged, does not evolve. It expands. It spreads. It finds new forms. Today, it's deep fake signatures. Tomorrow, it's AI-generated contracts. The tools will change, but the temptation stays the same. And so, the question becomes not just how do we punish what happened, but how do we prevent what comes next? That's where Jasmine's final act, the Crockett Fiscal Transparency Act, becomes more than policy. It becomes promise. A promise that next time, someone will be watching. That next time, silence won't be the default setting. That next time, the people won't have to wait for a disaster to learn what happened to their money. It's not a fix-all, but it's a line in the sand. And sometimes that's where change begins. But no law, no hearing, no headline can fix everything. The real work now belongs to us, to the voters who decide whether transparency is worth fighting for, to the journalists who must ask the second question, not just the first, to the educators who teach their students not just to code AI, but to question who's using it and why, to the citizens who refuse to be distracted by spectacle when lives are shaped by spreadsheets, and to the next Jasmine, because there will be another woman, another worker, another voice in a room full of silence, deciding whether or not to speak. And when she does, we must remember this moment, not as a unique victory, but as a blueprint. A reminder that real power doesn't come from controlling systems. It comes from being willing to stand against them when they no longer serve the people they were built to protect. This wasn't just a political story, it was a moral one. And the human lesson at its heart is this: we are not powerless, not when we ask the right questions, not when we demand to see the receipts, and not when we remember that democracy isn't what happens when the powerful are speaking. It's what begins when we finally stop listening in silence. And if that was the lesson, the moral that thundered beneath every headline and echoed through every committee chamber, then what follows cannot simply be reflection, it must be action. Because stories like Jasmine Crockett's do not end at the Capitol steps. They begin there. They are not closed chapters, they are open summons. And now that we've seen what happens when silence is broken, when a lone voice stands before a billionaire and says, "Show us the truth," we are faced with a single, undeniable question. What will we do with that courage? It starts here. Not with grand speeches, not with anger flaring in comment threads, but with vigilance, with the quiet, sustained force of people who are no longer willing to be ignored. If you are a taxpayer, you are not a bystander. You fund this nation. Your work, your sweat, your hours, they built the roads, the satellites, the software, the aid programs. You have a right to know where every dollar goes. Not someday, not when the damage is done. Now. Because if Jasmine taught us anything, it's that oversight delayed is justice denied, and every signature hidden from the public eye is an opportunity for corruption to dress itself in ambition. So we ask you, don't let this story be a moment. Make it a movement. Call your representatives. Demand support for the Crockett Fiscal Transparency Act. Ask where your local school district's federal tech grant went. Question the names behind the next cutting-edge innovation before they become the next scandal. Because transparency is not the enemy of progress. It is the only way progress survives. If you are in the media, stop chasing volume and start chasing verification. Ask the third question, not just the first. If you are in government, look around your office. At the stack of contracts, the unexplained invoices, the reports no one's opened in months, and ask yourself, what would happen if someone like Jasmine walked in right now? And if you are in tech, this is your mirror moment. Innovation without accountability is not brilliance. It's theft with better branding. Build systems that explain themselves. Design AI that leaves a trail. Refuse to hide behind complexity. Because if your product can't survive public scrutiny, maybe it's not the future at all. And if you are a citizen, just one person reading this, watching this, feeling the knot in your chest, you already have the power. You are the storm they fear, not with violence, not with chaos, but with clarity, with questions, with persistence, with the courage to demand that the next Jasmine is never standing alone again. The truth is, we should never have needed her to carry this fight alone. We should have stood beside her long before the cameras ever turned on. So ask yourself right now in this breath, what will I no longer allow to go unseen? What lie will I no longer let pass unchallenged? Whose silence will I no longer call wisdom? This isn't just a call to action. This is your invitation to wake up, because the next billion-dollar scheme is already being written. The next AI-generated fraud is already in code. The next fake contract is already printing. And somewhere out there, another woman is preparing to walk into a hearing room, armed with nothing but documents, questions, and the audacity to believe that truth still matters. Will she stand alone? Or will you be ready? This is your moment. Don't just watch history, shape it. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.